Michael Huemer, thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
If I had to describe one thing in all of your philosophical work, it would be the search for a foundation of knowledge, like Descartes and Thomas Reid. Where do you see yourself as correcting or updating them?
Let's see. How am I correcting Descartes? Descartes was too much of a rationalist. Uh, so Descartes' epistemological view was more this sort of top-down view that you start with some very general abstract principles, and then you try to infer everything starting from those principles. And most knowledge is the other way. You start from particular concrete judgments, and then you generalize from there. Usually when you start from an abstract generalization, it's wrong. And when you try deducing things from it, then you get a whole bunch of errors. And that includes when you think that you started from something that's completely self-evident, right? Like Descartes, right? So like he thought there's a completely self-evident principle that you can't have more reality in an idea than in the cause of the idea or something like that. And there, right? Which presupposes that there's this thing called degrees of reality. And then that's used to infer the existence of God, right? And then, there's another self-evident principle that God cannot be a deceiver. And so like this is all part of his story about how you're going to get knowledge of the external world. But the things that philosophers think are completely self-evident are often outright rejected by other philosophers,
Mm.
right? So like almost no one today thinks that Descartes' arguments for the existence of God are good. Right. So anyway, but like it's not just about that particular issue about the existence of God. It's that in general, this is not the way to build a system of knowledge. It's not to start from some completely general principle, right? And like, at one point he says, I've I've identified some truths like I think and I exist, and now I can infer a criterion of truth, right? Which is something like if you clearly and distinctly perceive something, then it must be true. Okay, and this is also not the right approach. Like you don't start with a criterion of truth, right? You start by learning particular individual things. Okay, what about Thomas Reid? I mostly just agree with Thomas Reid. Um,
Okay.
I think maybe his view was not completely explicit, so I don't know if he would completely agree with what I've said, right? But I claim that there's a general epistemological principle. Justified beliefs are based upon appearances. So it makes sense to assume that things are pretty much the way they appear until you get specific reasons for thinking otherwise. Okay, now, why is this different from Descartes? It's partly because I don't think that the foundations have to be absolutely certain, indubitable, incorrigible, whatever truths. The foundations of our belief system are things that we can presume to be true unless and until we have specific reasons for doubting them. You can have reasons for doubting things that were foundational, in which case you can revise them, but you stick with the things until you have reason for doubting them. Okay. Also, I didn't come up with this as a self-evident starting principle. I thought about how I knew things, right? First, I knew a lot of things in the ordinary way, and then I started reflecting on examples of things that I knew, right? And I noticed that when I form beliefs, when I'm trying to find the truth, my beliefs are based upon what seems right to me, which I claim is true of everyone whenever they're trying to figure out the truth about anything. If you reflect if you reflect on your own beliefs, you're going to see that.
How would you describe what a seemings are to someone hearing the term for the first time? And how do they differ from other sources of knowledge?
Well, so the second question is they don't differ from any other sources of knowledge because there are no other sources of knowledge.
Mm.
Everything that you would count as a reasonable candidate for a source of knowledge is, some kind of appearances. Okay, so like you have your knowledge of the external world, which comes from observation. What's observation? Well, it's having certain kinds of appearances, sensory appearances. So things look a certain way, sound a certain way, smell a certain way, etc. And you assume that they are that way unless you get reasons for doubting it. Okay, there's knowledge by memory. That's how you know about the past. Memory consists of having memory appearances. So I should say, going back for a second, perception isn't just having appearances. Like it's having sensory appearances which are caused by the object. Um, okay, but you could have hallucinations in which you have sensory appearances which are not caused by the real object, and they could look exactly the same. They could be the same experience. Okay, so the appearance is the internal state that we only call it a perception if that state was caused by a real object, and we call it a hallucination if that state was caused by something else, something in your brain. Okay. But okay, so the way that you know about the past is by memory. Remembering things consists of having memory appearances. There's a certain kind of experience where you seem to remember something, where the memory appearances are hopefully caused by a real event that really happened that was like what you remember. Okay. Um, when you reason, that consists of having a certain kind of appearances. So there are inferential appearances in which something seems true to you in the light of something else. So you consider some information that you call a premise, and then there's some other idea that you call a conclusion, and it seems to you like the conclusion would have to be true in light of the premise. Right. So this is just what's always going on.
Do other animals have access to it?
Animals have sensory appearances. I don't know if they have inferential appearances, but obviously they see things, they hear things. Most of them, right? Except for like clams or something like that. So okay, and so these appearances are a type of mental state which normally causes you to form beliefs, but does not have to. So normally, when you believe something, it's because something appeared a certain way to you. But the appearance is distinct from the belief; it causes the belief. It's also possible to have a case where you don't believe the appearances. So, suppose that you think that you're suffering from a sensory illusion. So, then you would not believe the appearances, but you still have those appearances. So, there are cases where you know that something is an illusion, but it still appears that way, right? And that shows that the appearance is distinct from the belief, right? It's also not just the disposition to form a belief, it's the mental state that explains why you have a disposition to form a belief.
How do we distinguish genuine intuitive appearance from temperamental or culturally conditioned reaction?
I'm not using the word appearance or intuition as a factive term, right? So having the intuition that P doesn't entail P. Okay. So if somebody has a mistaken intuition, that's still an intuition. Okay. So like there's not really a question of how do you distinguish the real intuitions from the fake intuitions. There aren't any fake intuitions. All right. There are intuitions that are mistaken, but they're still intuitions. So now, if your question is, oh, how do we distinguish true from false? Well, there's not like a general criterion of truth. What could that be? Like, tell me the procedure by which you will always be correct and never make a mistake. There's no such procedure, right? The rational procedure is, well, assume that things are the way they appear until you have specific reasons to doubt it. If you have no specific reasons for doubting your appearances, then you stick with them, right? But will that guarantee you that you will always be correct? No, nothing will guarantee that you will always be correct, right? This is human life.
It seems unfalsifiable to say that X is true unless it is false. So, is it inevitable that all foundations are like this? Like, for example, in mathematics,
So first, I didn't say X is true unless it's false. I said it's reasonable to assume that things are the way they appear unless you have specific reasons for doubting it. Okay. Now, does the appearance then become unfalsifiable? No, exactly the opposite. We just accepted that it was possible for there to be grounds for doubt, in which case you would give it up. So that's exactly what falsifiability is. Okay. Then you might say, oh, okay, but the claim that appearances um, are you're justified in believing appearances unless you have a reason for doubting it. Is that claim itself falsifiable? I don't know. Okay, because it's necessarily true, and there's some sense in which it can't be falsified. Right? There's no way that it could be false. But is there something that counts as a test of it? Okay, well, what's the test for epistemological claims in general? What's the test for philosophical claims? It's something like, well, you could consider examples of things that we consider to be justified and things we consider to be not justified, and then you could see how well this theory does at classifying the things that seem to be justified or not. So there's this theory of phenomenal conservatism, and then, okay, some things we think are justified. We think the theory of evolution is justified. We think I'm justified in believing that I have two hands. And okay, so you could go through some examples and you could say, does my theory explain these things? And if it does, that's good for the theory. And if it doesn't, then that would be bad for the theory. Obviously, also give examples of things that are unjustified. So uh, I'm not justified in believing that there's a pink unicorn in front of me. Okay, just as a theory, explain that. Yes.
And on what points is it your framework different from naturalism?
Well, what do you mean by naturalism?
So, given the enormous success of modern science, many philosophers think that some form of naturalism is now part of common sense, that we should assume everything, including morality and consciousness, that fits into scientific physicalist pictures, unless forced otherwise. So, what is wrong with treating methodological naturalism as default?
Well, so I was trying to get what naturalism is. And then for a second, it sounded like naturalism is physicalism. Everything is physical. Is that the view? Because I don't think everything is physical. Why? I'm conscious. How do I know that I'm conscious? Because I'm immediately aware of it. In fact, I know that better than I know anything else. As far as I can tell, that's not physical. As a matter of fact, like if you tell me that consciousness is physical, then I don't know what you mean by physical anymore. Because I would think that that's like the paradigm example of something that's not physical. If that counts as physical, then I don't know. Does physical just mean anything? In which case, physicalism would be an empty view. Also, I think they're abstract objects. So I don't think that the number seven is a physical object, but I think the number seven exists. So not everything is physical. Okay, so I guess I'm a non-naturalist. Okay, the other thing you mentioned was something about natural science. So sometimes people say things like, "Oh, naturalism is the view that everything that exists is subject to scientific investigation." I guess that's true. I don't know. It depends on what you mean by scientific. So if the claim is everything is empirical, no, not everything is empirical. Some things are known a priori, right? Some things are known by thinking about it rationally. Okay. I know that the shortest path between any 2 points is a straight line a priori. I know that by thinking about that, and I could see that that was true. All right, I know that 7 is prime just by thinking about it. I don't have to do any experiments. So does that count as a non-scientific? Okay. If so, then I guess naturalism is false.
But consciousness is affected by the changes in the body. Would you agree with that?
Your experiences are affected by what happens in your brain, right? And yeah, that's not like really under dispute.
What do you think about the idea that our concept, abstract concepts like the unicorn, arise from natural objects like horses and winds? And and we combine them in our mind to derive the concept of a unicorn. And so numbers can also be explained in that way.
Well, okay. So, I mean, first, that's a little bit odd because the concept of a unicorn is not a particularly abstract concept, right? Like an abstract concept, I think of as things like the concept of the derivative in calculus. That's an abstract. That's pretty abstract, but unicorn is pretty concrete. Okay. Anyway, um, you have concepts that appear not to refer to anything observable. Or you have yeah, you have concepts where you have not directly observed that something satisfied that concept, you could say. Okay, but then you might think that somehow they're derived from experience in some way. Now this isn't really on the topic of what we were talking about before, right? Because I didn't say anything about where concepts come from. Okay, but is it in fact true that all concepts come from observation? I don't know. There could be innate ideas. I don't really know. Like you have to ask the cognitive psychologists. Um, but okay, so you have concept of numbers. Um, how do you teach a child what the number 2 is? I guess you show them, like, pairs of things. You go, like, 2 fingers and then whatever, like, 2 cough drops or okay, show them 2 things, and then you show them enough pairs of things and say, "That's 2," followed by the sortal term, and then they get the idea of what you mean by 2. Okay. Uh, so, I would say there's a property that's present in all of the examples that you're giving. You could say the property of two-ness, right, which is a property had by those objects. Okay. Um Yeah, that's where the concept comes from. So the concept applies to things in the physical world. It applies to anything. So you can have 2 apples, but you could also have 2 ideas, right? So like the numbers apply to physical things, they also apply to mental things, they also apply to other abstract objects. Like I have 2 formulas here, right? Okay. It's like a completely general concept. And then so when you're thinking about this really abstract property, which doesn't appear to be a physical property per se, right?
What do you think about Plato's forms? What is their nature?
Um, you know, Plato had some confusion. So modern day Platonists are generally understood as people who think that universals exist necessarily. Okay, so universals are things that could be present in more than one thing. Universals are supposed to be things that multiple objects could have in common. So blue is a universal because multiple particular objects can be blue. So they're sharing in something. They share blueness. And there's blueness here and there's blueness here in different places at the same time. Okay. Um, okay, that's universals and they exist necessarily, meaning you can't do anything to destroy blueness. You could destroy the particular blue objects, but you can't destroy blueness. Okay. And so, like, here's an argument that blueness exists. Okay. Premise one, blue is a color. Premise two, the statement that blue is a color is a statement of the form FA using predicate logic terminology. So it's a predicate subject statement where the subject is blue and the predicate is being a color. The truth conditions for statements of that form require that the subject term refer to something, right, for the statement to be true. So the subject term blue refers to something. If it refers to something, it must refer to blue. And so blue must exist. Okay. Furthermore, and to think that, so then there's a question of whether it exists necessarily, meaning there's no way that you could rearrange the world so that it would stop existing. Okay. And the reason for thinking that is, well, blue is necessarily a color. It's a necessary truth that blue is a color. You can't rearrange the world such that blue will be a shape instead of a color. Or something else will just it'll stop being true that blue is a color. So, okay. So it's a necessary truth. So it's necessary that blue exists. Now, about Plato himself, Plato had some sort of more confused views. So the most confused view that Plato had was apparently he thought that the universals instantiate themselves. And apparently he thought that there are all of these, like there are perfect circles and perfect triangles existing in some realm called Plato's heaven. And that the universal is a perfect example, or the form is a perfect example of the property that you're talking about. That is confused, right? And then there would be remarks like, there's nothing more beautiful than beauty itself. No, that is false. That is confused. The universal doesn't instantiate itself. Like the property of blueness is not blue, right? Like to be blue, you have to be a physical object. Your property is an abstract object. It's not blue. Okay. Now, okay, and then a lot of things can be beautiful. So the form of beauty could itself be beautiful. That's a special case, right? But most properties cannot instantiate themselves. So anyway, okay, yeah. So that's about where I agree and disagree with Plato.
And what about the property of goodness?
That's also a good property. Yeah, goodness is also a universal, right? So you can give examples of good things, and then you'll see that they have something in common, which is goodness. So it's a universal. It also exists necessarily. It's not a physical property. So um, no matter how you describe the physical properties of something, it doesn't logically follow that it's good.
Yeah.
However, people have ethical intuitions. They have experiences in which they think about something and it seems good or it seems bad, right? Or similarly, they think about an action, it seems right or it seems wrong. So, per our previous discussion, we should assume that things are good, bad, right, and wrong unless we have specific reasons for thinking otherwise.
So on Moore's naturalistic fallacy, what do you think he gets right and what do you think he got wrong?
Um, I guess I basically agree with Moore. Um, so in ethics, they distinguish between evaluative and descriptive statements. This terminology might be a little bit tendentious, okay? When I make this distinction, I'm not implying that evaluations don't really describe something, okay? But it's just that this is a stipulative use of descriptive. Descriptive statements mean statements that are not evaluative. And evaluative statements are statements that say that something is good or bad or right or wrong. They're inherently positive or negative about something. Okay. So it's true that you can't deduce evaluative statements purely from descriptive statements. Like, I think that's correct. Also, G. Moore is correct that you can't give a definition of good in purely descriptive terms, using purely descriptive concepts where it genuinely captures the meaning of good. You can't do that. You can only explain evaluative terms using other evaluative terms. So if somebody doesn't know what good means, like it means valuable, it means positive, or something like that. But those are all value terms. You can't explain it using descriptive terms. Like, I think that's all correct.
Do you see any similarities between the property of goodness and the property of largeness?
They're both properties that a lot of things could have, but they're very different properties. So,
Both of them have this objective and subjective dimensions. So when someone says X is large, another person may say, no, that's small. It depends on which category we are talking about. A small rocket is larger than a large pencil, right? So, but
okay.
we know that largeness is not a non naturalistic property.
Okay. So, yeah, what about largeness? So one feature of the concept large is that um, the conditions the conditions for largeness are relative to a sortal term. As you just mentioned, like a large pencil is smaller than a small planet. So like, even though the pencil is large and the planet is small, pencil is smaller. Okay. So, but that's just sort of like relativity to a sortal term, which is a little bit of an unusual property for an adjective to have, but not totally bizarre, right? Where like the meaning of the adjective sort of changes depending upon what noun it was attached to. Okay. But I would not describe that as subjectivity, right? It's just like the maybe large means something like larger than the average thing of this type of the type that we're talking about. Okay. Um, Now there might also be this kind of sortal term relativity with good. So there's a good pencil versus a good person. The conditions for being a good person are very different from the conditions for being a good pencil. Bizarrely, you can also apply good to things that are bad. So, like, you could say John is a really good assassin. Okay, assassins are bad. That's a bad thing to be, but you could be good at being an assassin, meaning I don't know, you serve the goals of assassins in an effective way or something like that. Okay, so there is that kind of similarity that the conditions for application switch depending on the sort of term you're applying to. Okay, but you might also think maybe there's um, a subjectivity. There's a sort of subjectivity to a lot of terms where it's like when somebody applies it, you might think, oh, that's a matter of opinion. Large is not a great example of that. Like, I'm sure you can have examples where it seems kind of subjective that somebody says that the thing is large, but that's not usually your reaction to such statements, right? Like, that's a large dog is usually thought of as pretty objective, right? It's like it's larger than most dogs, so it's a pretty objective fact that it's a large dog. But you could have things like I don't know, like frightening. Okay, that was a frightening event. Like a lot of people's reaction would be, okay, so that's subjective. That's a matter of opinion, or it's a matter of judgment, or something like that. So then you could ask whether good is that way. Um, Maybe some uses of good are subjective, like that was a good movie. I don't think good in good person is subjective like that. I don't think it's just a matter of opinion. Yeah, I guess you have to think more about what we mean by this, right? Do you mean like, oh, there's no truth? There's right? Like there's no fact? No, there is a fact about whether somebody is a good person or an action is a good action.
Now, what I meant is that we think there is a subjective dimension, but it is tracking something objective. When we talk about largeness, so there is a subjective way of describing a pencil, but we can also describe it in an objective way, like 10 centimeters or kilometers, for example. So there it is something objective in the world, but there is a subjective way of describing it when we say large. I was thinking if there was an analogy between largeness and goodness in the sense that eating a chocolate is good, but saving a life is also good, right? Likewise, a pencil can be large and a planet can also be large.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what so the 2 different kinds of objects being large, that's analogous to different kinds of things being evaluated as good. So, like, a person could be good and a pencil could be good. Okay. Um, and it appears that those mean different things. Okay, but, you know, what you pointed to was that there's the term large, but then there's this sort of underlying dimension of maybe length in which everything has a specific measure. And largeness refers to being greater than some threshold on that dimension. So, okay, the dimension just exists objectively. We don't have don't have to argue about it. But then there's sort of like different people could have different places where they put the threshold for something counting as large. Okay, that's not true for goodness. There is a dimension of goodness, like there are things that are better and worse, and something could be twice as good as another thing. But there's no variation in where people put the threshold, right? Because the there's the balance point between good and bad, and anything that's better than nothing is good. Like any positive amount of goodness counts as good. It could be slightly good or right. So it's not a threshold. I mean, it's not a concept with a subjective threshold or whatever, where people would disagree about where the threshold is, right?
Thomas Reid raises this objection against David Hume that if goodness and badness depended on our constitution, then wouldn't a change in that constitution make bad things good and good things bad? So
Yeah.
to me, it seems obviously true. We have to bite the bullet because that is the reason why we care so much about pain. It's due to our constitution. And if our constitution was different, then maybe things would be different. What is wrong with that argument?
Yeah. The example of pain is interesting because if you imagine our constitution being different such that we liked pain, so that right, so that is already a little bit odd. That's just an odd thought experiment that people like pain. But there are, in fact, cases where people like pain. So some people enjoy spicy food, which is a kind of pain. So it is, in fact, possible to enjoy pain. Would pain then be good? And then the answer is yes, it would. But actually, in the actual world, the cases in which people enjoy the pain are also good. So, like the person who enjoys spicy food, it's good to give them spicy food. Okay. So but then you have to imagine a change in our disposition. Maybe you can imagine this. There's a case, like, I can't imagine a case where a person thinks that their own suffering is good. Like, I don't, I don't quite, right. Well, maybe they could like have an abstract theoretical belief that their suffering is good, like because they're a sinner and sinners deserve to be punished or something like that. Okay. Um, okay. But anyway, going back, thought experiment. Imagine a society in which people approve of torturing babies. So the baby comes out and they just like burn the baby just, to make it cry. And they know that the baby is suffering and they just think that that's a funny thing to do. Okay. If you live in that society, is it good to torture the babies? Should you torture the babies? Your baby comes out and let's say, nobody's watching, but people in your society generally think that it's good to torture babies. Should you torture the baby? The answer is no. Right. Okay, so it's not subjective, right? Subjective means that it depends on the attitudes of observers or something like that. Um, okay, well, what if you personally like torturing babies? Then should you torture the baby? No, still no. Still, it's still bad, right? So it appears that it's objective as far as I understand what objective means.
If moral disagreements persist even after we account for biases, then does moral intuitionism not lead to subjectivism?
No. Um, okay, so first, well, maybe we should first say what these things are. Like subjectivism is the view that the truth of moral statements depends upon the attitudes of observers towards the things that are evaluating. So something's being good depends upon people having some kind of positive attitude towards it. Okay. So, a view is an action, and they usually think this about all moral concepts. So, a typical subjectivist view is an action is right provided that it's approved of by your society or something like that. So then different things are right in different societies. This is cultural relativism. Or, it could be the view that to say something is good just means that you personally approve of it. You're just reporting your own attitudes. Okay. The intuitionist view does not say that, right? The intuitionist view is that, well, there's just a fact about what's good or bad, and it's not dependent on you, right? So this is a objectivist, realist view. Um, what is the relationship between intuitions and the facts? The relationship between our intuitions and the moral facts is like the relationship between all of our appearances and all of the facts that they're about, right? So what's the relationship between our sensory experiences and the facts of physical reality? It's not that our sensory experiences create the facts of physical reality. It is that our sensory experiences are our only way of knowing about the facts of physical reality. Our sensory experiences represent the physical facts, and we assume that the physical facts correspond to them unless we have reason to think otherwise. But the sensory experiences don't create the facts. Okay. And our ethical intuitions are the way that we would know about the ethical facts, but they don't create the ethical facts. It's just like that. Okay, now you had asked about disagreements. So, do disagreements persist after accounting for biases? Well, do we ever fully account for our biases? Like that may not have in fact ever happened. Um, but okay, but let's say that we have disagreements that we can't resolve. Then what? I mean, nothing really. Like that's then, you know, we have a bad situation, whatever, we have a misfortune, right? Which is true in any subject. If you have disagreements that you can't resolve, then that is unfortunate, right? But that doesn't make you doubt that the facts exist, right? If you have unresolvable disagreements with between people who seem like about equally qualified, you know, both highly qualified and about equally qualified, then that should cause you to doubt your own judgment about those specific things that they're disagreeing about. That should not cause you to doubt your judgment about everything in the subject. Like it shouldn't cause you to doubt the things that there's not disagreement about. And it shouldn't cause you to doubt that there are facts in the subject. Okay. I mention this because people talk a lot about particular ethical issues that there's disagreement about. And then they don't talk about the things that there's not disagreement about. So there's a disagreement about abortion, and then philosophers talk on and on about that issue. Like, is abortion morally wrong or not? Okay, but then there's no disagreement about whether you should just like kill somebody on the street for the fun of it. Right? No disagreement. And because there's no disagreement, we don't talk about that. Okay. But that is a thing that there's agreement about. So that is probably a fact that it's wrong to kill people for fun.
The benefit of a naturalistic framework seems to be that in science at least, there seems to be some ways of resolving disagreements. So if someone disagrees on physics, you can just carry out an experiment, right? So that seems to be the benefit of naturalistic frameworks.
I mean, we don't generally adopt views because they have benefits. Like we adopt views because they're true. So, like, right, like it's not that something is false because it's inconvenient, right? So, okay, so if we can't resolve certain, like some ethical disagreements can be resolved, but maybe some of them can't be resolved, and that's inconvenient and like too bad. But that doesn't mean that that's not true, right? Okay. Also, can all scientific disagreements be resolved? No, that's not really clear, right? There are scientific disagreements that have not been resolved. It's really not clear that they can be. Okay. If you look at the interpretation of quantum mechanics, there are like multiple different theories that appear to explain the same data, and there are disagreements about which is more plausible. It's not obvious that there is a way of resolving that, but then so what? Like, so it's a misfortune, but that doesn't mean that like there's no objective fact or that we don't have any way of knowing about the subject matter or anything like that.
Is there such a thing as the point of view of the universe?
I mean, you mean literally?
Henry Sigwig uses this phrase.
Yeah, yeah, good. Okay, so literally, there's only a point of view of the universe if like the universe is conscious or there's a God, and like maybe the universe is part of God or something like that. I don't know whether there's a God or so I'm agnostic. But I don't think that Sidgwick meant it literally. I think it's just a metaphor. He just meant sort of like the objective point of view or a point of view that would take into account everybody's perspective in a fair way. Okay, so there's like my perspective where I'm like the center, I'm the most important thing, and I'm thinking in terms of my desires and my plans and the way that the way that things look to me, right? The way I experience the world. But then I should try to be aware of other people's perspectives. And then there's the idea of a person who would be able to understand everybody's perspective. There may not actually be such a person, but you can sort of talk about what would appear to be the right thing to do from that perspective. Okay. And that is the moral point of view.
Henry Sigwig famously arrived at the dualism of practical reason. Rational self interest and universal benevolence seem equally self evident. Where did he go wrong?
Well, I didn't completely understand why he thought that egoism was potentially a rational position. So you have reasons for pursuing your self interest, and you also have reasons for taking into account other people's interests. Um, but like I just don't see why he thought or why anybody thought that it could be rational to think that to only pursue your self interest, to only consider your own interests. And that seems irrational because you know that other people have interests, and there's no reason why yours would be objectively more important. Right? Like you feel your interests more or you feel your desires and you see your perspective, but that doesn't mean that it is in fact more important, right? So, um,
You often start with commonsensical, widely shared premises, but sometimes you end up with very radical conclusions about authority and immigration, for example. A utilitarian also begins with commonsensical views that altruism is good. Then he uses reason but arrives at very counterintuitive prescriptions about self sacrifice and the repugnant conclusion. Why do you not agree with them if arriving at radical conclusion itself is not a problem for you?
yeah, good. Yeah, I have an article called Revisionary Intuitionism, which sort of describes how an intuitionist could arrive at revisionary views, even though the starting point is, things are probably the way they appear. You can wind up thinking that things are different from the way they appear in some pretty significant respects. And also, that the intuitionism gives a chance for things like utilitarianism turning out to be true. Which, by the way, most I think other meta-ethical theories don't really account for this or, don't want to account for this maybe, right? But, like, if you have a subjectivist view, then I don't see how a radically revisionary ethics can come out of it. Or a non-cognitivist view. If you have a nihilist view, then you shouldn't have any ethics, right? Okay, anyway. So, but if you have an intuitionist view, there are objective facts, um, independent of our attitudes, and it could be that our attitudes are radically misguided. That's not a crazy thing to think. And then you could get reason for thinking that. And how could that be? Like, so this is what the utilitarian needs to do. Like, their their position is radically counterintuitive in certain respects, and I could just give a list of very counterintuitive implications. Okay, like you have a healthy patient, and you have 5 people who need organ transplants for 5 different organs. You could kill the healthy patient and then give his organs to the 5 people. You could save 5 lives and only cost 1 life. Okay. And suppose that you can make it look like he died by accident so that you won't get in trouble and you can continue doing this. Okay. Um, okay. And then it looks like the implication of utilitarianism is that that would be the right thing to do or something like that. Okay. So, like, why I'm not a full-on utilitarian is that there are multiple counterintuitive implications like that. Okay, what the utilitarian needs to do, I think, is so one thing they can do is try to explain away our intuitions, give explanations of specific biases that we would have, and I don't mean just saying in general that we're biased. I mean identifying the specific bias. Okay, like, status quo bias. People have a bias towards approving of the way things are done in their society. And the way that you show the relevance of this is by looking at how things are done differently in different societies, and then people have different normative intuitions in those other societies that match. Okay, anyway, so identify specific biases and then explain how they lead to the specific intuitions that are conflicting with your theory, right? And then another thing they can do is give more general ethical constraints. So utilitarianism is a very general ethical theory, but you can have even more abstract and general conditions that are going to be widely accepted. Okay, like say transitivity of better than. Right? Like if A is better than B and B is better than C, then A is better than C. So that's a more general, more abstract thing that almost everyone agrees with, even if you're not a utilitarian. Okay, and then it could turn out, and it does turn out that a lot of some common sense ethical views conflict with that, right? Or, they'll they'll conflict with a combination of general abstract principles like that. Okay. And so like you might be required to give up some very general abstract and extremely plausible ethical axioms by some of the common sense ethical views. Okay. So this is a sort of thing that the utilitarian needs to do, which is a reasonable project to attempt to do. I'm not fully convinced yet because there's a lot of really counterintuitive things that come out of utilitarianism. Okay, I'm not sure that they've explained them all away.
How does moral progress occur? You have said that it's always a few people in a society who lead moral progress. So, what is it that they can access that others are not able to see?
People go wrong about a lot of things because they have biases. So, like people will have self-interested bias, so they'll be tempted to make ethical judgments that approve of themselves and approve of what they want to do for other reasons, or what would be in their interest to do for other reasons. Another thing is like the status quo bias, where they're just biased towards the conventions of their society and sort of judging those conventions to be right. Um, but people will vary in how susceptible they are to these biases. So there are going to be some people who are um, less biased than others. Not completely unbiased, but just less biased than others. Okay. So those people will have a tendency to get closer to the ethical truth. They will see problems in their society that other people don't see. And then they will try to improve things on those dimensions. And then if they succeed, then sort of the conventions will move. They will move to be a little bit better. And then the next generation will start from a better starting point. And then the people who are less biased in the next generation will see further, right? They will see things that are still a little bit wrong, And a good example of this I like is John Locke and his letter concerning toleration, where he was advocating for religious tolerance, which was not at all widely accepted in his society. People were fighting over religion. People were thinking that if somebody has the wrong religious views, you should persecute them, maybe throw them in jail, maybe in extreme cases, execute them or whatever. And John Locke was saying, no, no, we should tolerate people. We should not kill people who disagree with us. Okay. However, in that book, he could not see his way to tolerating atheists. So he could see that you should tolerate other Christians. I see, couldn't see that you should tolerate atheists. Okay. But once the conventions of society had moved to tolerating different religious people, the people of that time could then see that, oh, maybe we should also tolerate atheists. Right. Okay. Because it's difficult for a person to see to a point of view that's radically at odds with their society. Like the people who are less biased than average will see something that's a little bit at odds, but there will be something that's too far. It was too far to go for Locke to see all the way to tolerating atheists. Okay.
Once we have discovered moral truths, what moves us to act? David Hume famously said that reason is innate. In your view, where does moral motivation come from?
Reason is not inert, or it's not purely instrumental. You can reason about what's morally right, and you can have a motivation to do the things because they're morally right. However, the majority of people have very low moral motivation. It's not zero, but it's really low. Okay, meaning they will not make great sacrifices for moral reasons. Okay, so like, this is often disguised because most people do not violate moral norms in obvious ways in their day-to-day life. So, um, when they see something that they want, they don't just grab it and steal it. Um, okay, so and then when they get mad at someone, they don't just punch the person. Okay, so like you could see cases where a person would want to do something that would serve their self-interest, and then they don't do it, and it's something that would be morally wrong. And then it looks like the people have moral motivation, but what's actually going on in most of those cases is they're respecting the social conventions, and it's probably just an instinct that evolved in us to respect social conventions. Okay. So, and the way that you can tell this is that there are cases in which the social conventions are at odds with morality, and most people then act according to the conventions. Okay. So, like, a good example is you can convince a lot of people that it's wrong to buy animal products from factory farms. Like almost all of the meat that's sold in the US is from factory farms. It's not that hard to convince people that it's morally wrong to buy that. And then after convincing them, almost no one will stop doing it. And the reason is, oh, well, it accords with the conventions of their society. Everybody else is doing it, so they're just going to keep doing it, even if they believe that it's wrong. So, okay, but it's not that their moral motivation is zero. It's just that it's really low. Okay, so like if there was a product that tasted the same and it was about the same price, maybe it's the same price, it tastes the same, it's equally nutritious, whatever, like synthetic meat or something, then maybe they would switch over. All right, but they're just not going to make a significant sacrifice to their interests. So I guess this is to say, and so that social convention is a large part. It's not the only thing that makes people act decently. Like sometimes they just have emotions where they care about other people and then they don't abuse the other people because of that. So most of what looks like moral behavior is caused by something other than conscience. That's not to say that there is no conscience though. So there's sort of variations among human beings on almost every psychological trait. So some people are more conscientious than others. So there are some people who are strongly morally motivated, and then a lot of people who are only slightly morally motivated. Right.
Suppose we start by assuming that ought implies can, and that we cannot help but increase our own good, even when we are being altruistic. And we try to explain altruism the same way celibacy and suicide is explained in the theory of evolution. What is wrong with that starting point?
Um, so I'm a little bit confused as as to what you're saying.
So it's a
So
sophisticated version of Rand's egoism, based on psychological egoism.
Oh, I mean, we know that psychological egoism is false, right? Okay, so usually people think, oh, the issue is whether people are inherently moral or altruistic or something like that. But there are many cases of non-selfish actions that are not altruistic either. Right. So, like, there's the cases of so-called altruistic punishment, let's put it this way, that people sometimes call it that, where somebody has done something wrong and you will take on a cost to punish them because you're mad at them. Okay. So, okay, so it's not driven by self-interest, right? Because like, there are experiments in which they do this. Whatever, people are playing some game and there's some money involved where you get some money for doing things in the game. And then people in the game will spend their own money to cause somebody who they think acted wrongly to lose money. And, it'll just be like black and white in the experiment that you do not get a reward for doing that. Like you lose money and people will do it. They will like lose their own money to make sure that the other person doesn't profit from being bad. Okay. So anyway, because they were mad or they were offended or whatever. Okay. Anyway, so like there are cases, and like the people who are inclined to psychological egoism are more persuaded by these kinds of examples, right? Cynical examples where there's like harming a person in a way that's not in your self-interest, right? Just because you don't like them. Okay. You could have this, like, this is an example, Adolf Hitler killed a lot of people. Why did he do that? Was it for his self-interest? No, you know what? He hated the Jews and a bunch of other groups. That's why he wanted to kill them. Like, towards the end of World War II, he knew that he was losing the war. But, he's got all of these people in concentration camps. He could use them to do labor, but instead he kills them, okay, which harms his own chances of winning the war. So why is he doing that? So it's against his interest. He's doing that because he hates them. Okay, so like, okay, so that's not egoism, right? It's just like people have emotions that make them want to do things, which can be independent of their interests. Okay. Anyway, okay, so I think that the argument was something like, oh, well, people can only act selfishly, and ought implies can, so it can't be true that you're obligated to act unselfishly. Yeah, so that's not true. People have free will. Yeah, so first, the first premise was not true. Like, we don't always act selfishly. Also, determinism is false. We do have free will. There's a range of things that you can do. You often have conflicting motivations. You have reasons for doing one thing and reasons for doing another, and you're often aware of the conflicting reasons, and you can decide which reasons to act on, roughly speaking. So,
Does political authority differ from other kinds of authority, like that of a physician or a parent?
it's usually in the cases where you think that somebody has authority, there's some explanation for why they would have the authority. And in the case of the government, political authority is the authority that the government is supposed to have, which they may not, in fact, have. It may be that no government actually has authority. And then, so the reasons that people give for why the state would have authority are different from the reasons that they would give for other cases. So, like, oh, your doctor has a sort of authority. It's sort of like you you trust his advice because he's an expert. Is the government like that? Is the government experts? Are they experts on what's good for society? No. Like the people who are running things like, "Oh, is Donald Trump an expert on what's good for society, and that's why we have to listen to him?" No. Very far from it. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, am I just saying this because I'm a pro-Democrat? No. Right. All right. The Democratic politicians are not experts either. Kamala Harris was not an expert on what's good for society. Okay. And then you have your parents. Like, there's a small child. The child doesn't know what he's doing. The parents know how the world works, and also the parents have instinctive motivations to protect the child. Okay, so that's why the parents take care of the child and like they control the child to stop him from hurting himself. Okay, is the government like that? No. Like the government knows a lot more than we do, and that they love us, and that's why they're going to protect us. No, that's not true either. Right? They're just people just like us. They're not any smarter, they're not wiser, and they don't love us. So, okay. So then, you think about like why the state would have authority. It's got to be something completely different. Okay. And none of the explanations for why the state has authority are very good. right? None of them are persuasive.
Are you sympathetic to epistocracy, like Garrett Jones argues in his book?
Yeah. Um, I I guess, I mean, I'm really an anarcho-capitalist, so I think the ideal society would not have a monopolistic central authority structure. Um, I guess I mean, I have some concern about epistocracy in that I'm concerned about who would decide or how they would decide who gets to vote, or like who is qualified, whatever the restrictions are on the smart people. I'd be worried that that would be somebody would game the system, you know.
Okay, final question. Or where do you feel the most genuine philosophical uncertainty right now?
Um, so I'm not sure how much it's philosophical and how much it's scientific. I think there are I think there are two great mysteries about the universe. One is the mystery of consciousness, which is just why is there consciousness at all? And I really don't know. I don't know why that should exist. And just from everything else that we know about the universe and how it was in the past, because it started out apparently with no conscious beings, um, it's just bizarre. It's just very strange and surprising that there would be conscious beings now. And the other mystery is um, it's sort of like about the origin of the universe itself, right? So people are saying there was a big bang around 14 billion years ago. And why did that happen? Why, why is that like that? And also, more particularly, why did it start out in an extremely low entropy state? Because there's a law of physics that entropy is constantly increasing. And low entropy states are intrinsically less probable. Like the reason why entropy is increasing over time is that higher entropy states are more intrinsically probable, right? Meaning, like if you describe the mathematical space of all of the possible configurations of the universe, higher entropy states are larger regions in that space, right? In that sense, they're intrinsically more probable. Low entropy states are smaller. Okay, so okay, so it's strange that the universe started in this extremely low entropy state 14 billion years ago, which according to Roger Penrose, has a probability of about 1 over 10 to the 10 to the 124 power. Okay, like if you pick the state of the universe at random for it to be that low entropy is that probability. Okay, so like, why
Mhm.
was it like that? Right. Which is, part of why anything interesting exists. Why are we not in
Mm.
thermal equilibrium, which is overwhelmingly the most likely state for a universe to be in?
Thank you so much for answering my question and giving me your time. I really appreciate it. Have a nice day.
Thanks. It's been great talking to you. Thanks for having me.